Hello and welcome to People, Politics and Power on Africa Independent Television, AIT. It is perhaps now safe to presume that the nagging issue of restructuring of the Nigerian Federation is at a stage that the nation can ill afford not to resolve. Perhaps it has reached the stage where those whose responsibility it is to make laws, we begin to look critically at the issue in the overall interest of the nation. The importance of the place of lawmakers was clearly articulated by President Muhammadu Buhari himself when he said the National Assembly and the Council of State were the legitimate and appropriate bodies to handle issues of restructuring. Ostensibly, the President is asking the lawmakers at national and state levels to carry out their statutory responsibilities. But has the National Assembly lived up to its responsibility as far as restructuring is concerned? The Vice Chancellor of Igbinedion University, Professor Egosa Osagai, accused the National Assembly of obstructing restructuring by not acting as representatives of the people. Osagai is a political scientist, and he delivered a paper titled Restructuring is Federalism and Federalism is Restructuring. And this was at an event in Benin. There are, however, indications that the heat is beginning to make the National Assembly take a fresh look at the issue. The Speaker of the House of Representatives, Yakubu Dogara, had at the return of the legislators from their long break promised that the National Assembly will revisit the issue of devolution of powers, which was one of the clauses in the Constitution Amendment exercise that was completed by the National Assembly before it went on its break. Now, all clauses pertaining to the devolution of powers had been shut down by the federal lawmakers in the said constitutional amendment process. Now, thereby sending what some people consider very wrong and worrisome signals that the people's representatives are aloof to the yearnings and aspirations of the people they are supposedly representing. So, how sincere is the National Assembly's pledge to turn a new leaf and look at the issues dispassionately? What do Nigerians expect from the lawmakers? The legislative arm of government as a tool for restructuring is the focus of our discussion on people, politics, and power on this edition. And joining me in the studio is an associate professor of political science, a publisher, Jideofo Adibe. Thank you so much for finding time to join us.
Yeah, thank you very much.
All right, as usual, before we begin our discussion, let's take you once again to the conference that was organized by the Arewa Research and Development Project on the North and the future of the Nigerian Federation, which took place in Kaduna.
Is involved in resource allocation. I will also want to demystify the resource control concept that people hold, and they keep on discussing it at every forum. And then I will also want to suggest policy framework that will guide the North in making its developmental needs. In Nigeria, like in many other countries of the world, discussions on revenue allocation and resource control continue to dominate, both academic and non-academic fora. Here, we live on 19 states out of the 36 states of the Federation that make up this country, constituting the North. We have the landmass that was discussed yesterday, issues of bordering on population was also raised yesterday. Then the issue of revenue allocation has always been on the table. And this has been for time immemorial. Nigeria became one from northern to southern protectorate in 1914. And of all this period of years, the north, that is constituting 19 states today, have been providing for the entire country in terms of revenue for a long period of time. And we have a lot of data to back up. So the issue of revenue allocation, all right, becoming a very topical issue now after the discovery of oil in 1957 in the South. So what we want to discuss here and dispel as Romo here is that since we have been providing the entire country with enough revenue and we have the heart to package everybody on board, we complained less, we had a very large heart to accommodate all. There is the need for us now to reinvent the culture of Nigeria in 1914 to 1957.
Growing up, studying, and at university level, we all we're being taught about the political economy of Nigeria. We've heard the same words, we've read the same figures. The question is, when are we going to get it right? In 1914, when the North contributed about 73% to running the central government, who are those in charge of running the northern region? These are youths. The likes of late Sir Ahmadu Bello, the Tafawa Balewa, the late Maitamasuli and co. They were all youths. What caliber of youths do we have in this day and age that are going to generate 73% to run the Nigerian government? Honestly, I'm not here to talk about the resource control formulation, the how and whatever, because they've done it all. We need to build on the human capacity of our youth. But the first question is, those people you're willing to develop, are they ready to be developed? Let me give you an example. In September, we had a program that took us to 8 states in northern Nigeria. We started with Katsina and we ended in Sokoto in 27 days. And the aim of that project was to create a mind shift and to get youth to wake up, to embrace entrepreneurship as a way to ending youth unemployment. And you know the funny thing? The lack of willingness. In Katsina, the turnout, I was disappointed, but when I went to Yola, we had only 10 youths in attendance. The highest we had was in Taraba, where we had 217. But in Katsina, we had not up to 100. And you know the funny thing? We were told, if you're going to organize such an event, and for it to be successful, you have to invite maybe some musicians, some house actresses and actors. That is going to motivate the youths to attend such programs. And honestly speaking, it gave me sleepless nights because I began to ask, where are we headed to?
A female voice from the Arewa organized conference in Kaduna. And of course, here she was talking about the future of Nigeria with the youths of today. Now, but for the patriotic movement of Nigeria, any effort aimed at restructuring Nigeria must be based on the existing 1999 Constitution as amended and must go through the legislature. The movement made its stance very clear at an interactive session with newsmen in Abuja this Monday.
But at the patriotic movement level, we believe you can fully restructure But the restructure on the parameters set out by that 1999 Constitution, we understand and we agree to be weak and deficient in some respects. It is important for Nigerians to be enlightened like this because people should not build castle on the air and expect a miracle to occur. Miracles occur in politics, but rarely do they occur. Politics is out of the possible. You do that which is possible, not that which you hope and wish you can attain.
Still be guided by the provision of the existing constitution. People have been talking about devolution, exclusive list, concurrent list. The question here is, upon all the noises, up to this moment we are speaking, people have not been categorical as to what aspect of those lists on the concurrent list and exclusive list they want to devolve to the states.
Nigeria is a work in progress.
Exactly.
Nobody can come and expect he can scatter everything and nothing happens. You take away sovereignty from those who are now in charge of your security, your day-to-day life, your everything, and expect that by tomorrow morning you can walk to the market because you are building a constitution and no policeman to protect you. We don't believe that is the way to go. But we do believe that the mission and the vision is clear. We should get there. But it's a work in progress.
Nigeria of our dream, the Nigeria we need, is the united, indissoluble, and cohesive Nigeria which guarantees equity, fairness, justice, and prosperity for its citizens. That is our focus on people, politics, and power. It is fresh, insightful, impactful. It's a must-watch. People, politics, and power on AIT. Join us to build bridges of unity.
Let's turn back to our guest in the studio. He is an associate professor of political science and a publisher, Jideofo Adibe. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Right. Now, I'm sure that you are not new, you are not strange to the entire debate about restructuring of Nigeria. But restructuring, as it is today, means different things to different people. What's your concept of a restructured Nigeria?
You're very correct. Restructuring has been there all along, and it can be argued that from the time of 1914 till now, Nigeria has been going through a series of restructuring. From the time we had 39 group of provinces in 1939 to the time we had the regions, to the creation of 12 states, you can see changes in the structure of the country down to now that we have 36-state structure. Again, if you look at the whole fiscal federalism part of it, you look at, say, for example, the principle of derivation, which has been changing and is now up to 13%. So it's always been there, and it's continuing to go there. The other thing, my own opinion, is that restructuring is presently just a mere buzzword, which is used by the various regional and ethnic factions of the political class in their struggle for power at the center and other federal privileges. If you remove all the veneer, it comes down to that, in my own opinion. That is why you can see that a particular part of the country, the North, for example, resist it. But historically, every part of this country has used the restructuring agreement to advance its interests. If you look at 1950, during the Constitutional Conference in Ibadan in 1950, where they met to discuss the McPherson Constitution that came into effect in 1951, the northern faction of the political elites insisted that unless they got 50% of all the seats in the proposed Federal House of Representatives, they will succeed from the country. So that was their own restructure. Give us this. And when Abiola's mandate, the election won by Abiola, was annulled, then first we had the whole argument of sovereign national conference. Sovereign national conference meaning that the conference should be constituted independent, and whatever decision that conference took will be binding. And that was the mantra of the Southwest political elites. And then it ran, and then when Obasanjo came to power, it changed to conference, national conference, no longer sovereign
national conference.
And then if you look at the Igbo faction of the political elite, their own is that they seem to have followed a mantra, a dogma, a kind of theory that says the goat follows the man with a palm front. So until this dispensation, they will haggle and struggle and position themselves to be part of any government in the center, often as a junior partner. In the last few years, they have replaced that with the mantra of marginalization. So if you talk about the Southwest, South-South, it's resource control is an article of faith, which can mean anything from give us more in derivation to we want to control the entire thing. So it is just depending on what you mean by that. And the first in the whole restructuring debate is for people to agree on what is to be restructured, because restructuring has been going on since even from 1900. You know, we've been changing from regions to state system, fairly strong center, fairly weak units. So it's been an ongoing. What I think is been happening now, and that's going to be irresistible, is that as a buzzword, when you repeat something like a mantra continuously, it starts to acquire the character of something that is an immutable fact. People come to believe that, yes, this is real. It's an obvious truth. It's just like the mantra of the IMF and the World Bank in those days. They say, structural adjustment program. Once you implement it, everything will be okay. From that is good governance, is bring back the state, is create institutions, not strong men. But the truth is that it is part of man's inherent search for sort of an alchemy that will turn base metals into gold. That there must be somewhere where the secret, a key, that once you turn it, everything will happen well. And I think so many things that have been overlooked is that in this restructuring debate, people forget, especially people who romanticize the First Republic as let us go back to they forgot that it was also an anarchic, a center of conflict between the ethnic majorities and the ethnic minorities in virtually all the regions. And we tend to romanticize. Of course, with due respect, and our founding fathers did a lot. But the truth is also that it was more like the center was held captive by the regions. Each of the regions had agents general in London. And so I think it is still part of man's search for an alchemy that will turn base metals into gold.
Okay, like you rightly observed, I mean, this whole restructuring process has been on, even from perhaps 1914 or even before then and all of that. And it has taken different shapes and forms since then, each region making one demand on the other. And I recall that it was the agitation by the minorities of the Western region that led to the creation of the Midwest region and all of that. And then, of course, you talked of the Sovereign National Conference, National Conference, and then in 2014 we had the National Confab here in Abuja.
In 2005, Obasanjo's own.
Yes.
Yeah, so, and you're right about the Midwest, but it's not just only that. It was also part of but that alliance between the NNPC and the NCNC, and it was more than to emasculate Chief Obafemi Awolowo, because Awolowo, every regional leader at that time supported creation of states, but not from his own domain, because they didn't want to be weakened. So when the NCNC and NPC went into alliance, and they found a way to, hit back at Awolowo by carving out, reducing his empire, if so to say. And that was part of the politics that played at that. And that's still playing. What I'm trying to say about this restructuring, and I'm not saying it cannot, the president, with due respect, has not handled it very well in terms of saying, look, you go through the constitution. It shows he's not a traditional politician, because Obasanjo, when it came, you set up a talk shop for people, confab, they go and talk, which you know that nothing will happen. And Jonathan did the same thing, and I can tell you my own feeling, and I feel very strongly about it. Even if PDP wins, the kind of restructuring people are talking about, a seismic so many seismic changes in the system, state police, depending on who is talking about, state police, reorganize the state system so that there will be parity of states and all this. It's unlikely to happen at one go because it will kind of destabilize the polity. So I can't rule out the possibility that a new government will come in and in its third year to set up another confab. Similar to what the APC is doing now, they set up a committee on what they call true federalism.
At least that is within their own party.
Yeah, but also they were supposed to have articulated this as part of their manifesto. And the irony is that El Rufai, that was leading it, he said those talking about restructuring were opportunists. And in any case, they talked about true federalism. There's nothing like true federalism. Every federalism is unique. You cannot compare the federalism in Canada from that of Switzerland, from that of USA. Each one is unique, just like our fingerprints.
Now, the point I was coming to is the fact that with these demands at every juncture of our national life, we have seen situations where some people had in fact asked for, demanded, agitated for sovereign national conference. And flowing from one or two examples that we have seen elsewhere around the world, when you constitute a sovereign national conference, it will mean putting aside all the democratic structures, all the constitutional structures that are in existence in order to achieve whatever goals that is set for that sovereign national conference.
You're right.
But here we are. As it is today, we have a sitting government. We have a constitution. We have structures like the legislature. And then this other school of thought to which the president belongs is saying, look, we must follow the constitutional procedure and go through the structures that exist in order to achieve whatever restructuring we want to do.
It's not likely to satisfy all, because even the constitution of the legislature is part of the issue of the restructuring advocates. Don't forget, let's face it, it's a tool in the hands of the southern faction of the political elites. They would tell you, for example, that in the Federal House of Representatives, there's a preponderance of the northern legislators. So it's part of the issue. And each legislator there will represent its interest. So you cannot really, even elsewhere, it's not everything that you go to achieve through the national legislature. Through referendums in a northern constitution. And we've seen it in Brexit, there are certain critical decisions. People still do not feel ownership of the 1999 constitution as amended. It remains a military document. So for the agitators, the advocates of restructuring, while I believe it's simply a veneer, a mask over part of their intra-political elite struggle for access to privileges and power, I don't think that it is right to say it's helpful, or it will douse the agitation to say you must go through the national legislature, which is part of this problem.
All the state legislatures.
Of the state, because...
Which is the normal process of amending
the constitution.
Yes.
I think that issue arose in the 2005 confab, 2014 confab. What will happen by the decisions? Because don't forget also the national legislation has its corporate interest. If you decide that once the confab's report will be adopted automatically, which will not be unconstitutional in the first place, but it also means that you are asking the legislators to commit class suicide. So they have to protect their own corporate interest. And that was why during the time of Jonathan, I think there was a move to reassure the legislature that whatever was recommended has to go through the legislature. That was a compromise. But you cannot go around and say, look, go through this channel, which people are pointing at as part of the problem. So, and for as long as you are telling them to go that, then the clamor will only intensify. And I think the APC is increasingly coming to the realization that it cannot avoid that clamor. It's not that I believe that the agitators are going to, if they have power, that they are going to do anything magnificently different. Every sustainable change, in my own opinion, comes incrementally. And there is people are even questioning all revolutions in history, whether they are worth the efforts, from the French Revolution to the Arab Spring and all that. Is there anything they accomplished that others have not accomplished with less shed of blood? So people are questioning. So the kind of seismic changes some advocates or a faction of the advocates, police, state police, resource control and all that, it's emotionally appealing, but often not the way social change happens in a sustainable manner. Often, given the intense polarization in our society, one will expect, bridge building, maybe if it is state police that people agree on, you do that incrementally. Just like with revenue allocation, the principle of derivation, so many things have been tried. And Obasanjo increased to 13. He says no less than 13, so maybe next time we consider it to 20%. So incrementally, then people build confidence. But seismic changes, all at a go, emotionally appealing as revolutions are, I don't think it's going to happen.
Would we be safe to say that what we are seeing now is a bourgeois political class struggle between those who do not, as it were, do not have access to power and economic privileges now, and who want more from the system, and those who are sitting right there right now and enjoying those privileges, the proponents and the opponents of
yes, you're right in a way, but sometimes, because these things have been repeated so often, it starts acquiring the character of objective reality to the man on the street. It's been respected so that it becomes more like ideological to believe.
Even when the man on the street does not totally understand and believe in what
he doesn't even understand it. But the part is that it's a mantra, a buzzword. Look, we need to restructure this society. People have different ideas of what restructuring means. But you believe that once we restructure, if you are the southern political elite, for example, say take the man in the streets in Onitsha, and you ask him, what do you really mean by restructuring, or that you are marginalized? He's more likely to point out Southeast has 5 states, Northwest has 7, others has 6. For him, that's marginalization, or that he has not been able to get at the presidency. If you ask the man from the North, for example, because you must take all the views, the fears in any federation, it's not just your own views. That's why it's a contest. So some are resisting, some are contesting. And often compromise has to be reached somewhere. If you ask the man in the streets, say from the North, he will ask you, well, given our population, the size, we are 79% in size, about 53% in population from projections of 63 census. Therefore, what we think we are getting based on our population is not even enough. And why will people from smaller populations, say the oil-producing states, get more when we do not get derivation for the food we produce or the electricity we generate from Kainji Dam? Therefore, what we have to, and don't forget that they also dominate the economy. So the political power, preponderance of political power we have, we use it as a lever. That's the man in the North. And you have to listen to the optics. And you ask the man in the Southwest, say, for example, what do you understand by that? He will tell you that if somebody from the South wants to aspire to be the president, you will need to meet the constitutional requirement of 25% of the votes in at least two-thirds, which is 24 states. So if you're from the South, you need to make sure you get the 16 states in the South plus another 8 states in the North. Whereas your northern opponent will need to corner the 19 states and get only 5. And they will point out to say, look, Lagos and Kano have about the same population, and local governments, this has 20, this has 10, and because now local governments are units for sharing revenues. These are different things. Others will believe it's just about devolution of power, that the states have become too weak and very, very dependent. So that do we merge some states? Do we just do away with local government structure? Do we go to federalism? So there's not been a consensus on where. What seems to be the consensus now is that this structure is not working optimally. Whether you are talking about those who are separatists and clamoring for self-determination, their mind is all form of this arrangement could do better.
If this structure is not working optimally, I'm not seeing anybody who's putting forward the options on the table to say, look, this and this and this is what we must do to make this structure work. and that leads me to ask the question: will this contestation, this agitation, will it ever end? Because at one point in time, one group or the other, one interest or the other, will feel cheated in whatever arrangement that comes along.
What we have, I've always said that part of the problem we have is statecraft, managing the optics, managing what people believe in. I think it was there under Obasanjo, for example, but the intensity is not like this. It's because some of these things, for example, when you say people who are arguing for restructuring, say, look, you must go through the National Assembly, you are not giving room for conversation. But a more nuanced response could probably have been that we'll look into it, we are going to set up a committee, which is what the APC has done. Or you do like the other politicians, Obasanjo and create an opportunity for them to talk.
Jonathan, yes.
And Jonathan talk. But to say, look, go back as like school children, it's not feasible. Even other places in the world, there are certain issues that people go outside the parliament, because the parliament, every institution, every organ, the executive, the judiciary, and the legislature, they develop corporate interest. The bureaucracy, they have corporate interest that they protect. And you cannot expect any of these institutions to commit class suicide.
Just like the National Assembly is perceived to be imbalanced, as it were today, in terms of representation. You recall that the 2014 National Conference also had similar issues.
Yes.
Those from the North felt that they were not properly represented, equally represented. And and I had a guest here who went as far as saying, all the NGOs, all the professional bodies that nominated people to that conference were more of Southern-based groups, and so by implication, they populated the conference and overshadowed the representation.
We do not have to overlook,
which is one of the reasons why they are jettisoning the outcome of that conference.
It is part of it, but not all. But such things must not be overlooked. And that has to be the legitimacy of whatever is constituted. The Muslims also complained that they were underrepresented in a body. We are in a low trust society, highly low trust, and people distrust everybody. And because of the interest at stake, the people feel that what is the objective of this? Others say it is to entrench their hegemony. So I don't think we should overlook that. We must start from areas of common ground. And another thing that happens is that in a democratizing society like ours, we're just only how many years away from autocratic rule? Since 1999 to now, probably 18 years.
About 18 years.
18 years. It is not unusual that bottled up feelings, that were not allowed expressions under autocracy and dictatorship, are now flowering. It is expected. So that's why we often say that in the short to medium term of transition from autocracy, it should be expected that the structures of conflict may be aggravated. And that is what we are seeing now. So by the time these aggravated conflicts are handled, it's either you remember, conflicts are not necessarily a negative force. They can be positive force, they can be negative, depending on how they are handled. So if we handle some of these expressions that were bottled, that are now coming up, if we handle them very well, it's not that they were not there under the military, but they were suppressed. If we handle them, then we represent progress. And after a while, people are going to get tired as the economy improves and as a democracy matures and people come to have more faith in the system, that it is only through a democratic, it's through democracy that it's not perfect, but it still offers us the best opportunities of being able to resolve our group conflicts. I can understand the feelings they go through in the National Assembly, but I think that will actually heighten the agitation rather than attenuate it.
What then bothers a lot of people is where we seem to promote these sectional and religious and ethnic interests over and above what is supposed to be the national interest in a federation such as ours. Why is it? What makes us retire to our base sentimental interest in driving what ought to be a national discourse?
First of all, you have to understand what is the focus of the agitation. The focus of the agitation, whether you call it restructuring and everything, is about access to state power and privileges at the federal level. So to the extent that you feel you're not having what you think is your entitlement from that national pool, you start feeling alienated from the national state system. So people are now, I call it elsewhere, de-Nigerianization process. People now are relapsing into their kind of primordial identities where they are trying now to renegotiate meaning. Whether you call it Boko Haram trying to set up caliphate, or the IPOB agitators for Biafra, or the other residual separatist movements, those Koklono Arewa Republic or Niger Delta or Duduwa Republic, they are still there. So it's because it represents a kind of alienation from the state system, and it is a statement about the crisis in our nation building, that we've not been able to get it right, to make every constituent part of the federation feel as a stakeholder. So for as long as people do not feel like they are stakeholders in the project, for so long will that alienation continue. And that alienation is not only for groups, it can also be for individuals. The policeman you meet on the street and you give him 200 naira and he looks the other way, is as alienated from the state system as the Boko Haram person who takes up terrorist attack because he wants to set up a caliphate state. So the state, we have to come back. At the beginning of this regime, the government, some of us were arguing that the government should focus on one, reconciliation. And that the government should focus on rebuilding trust among Nigerians. And that's why some of us were extremely critical of the government's probe rhetoric, and all this kind of a thing. And some of us did warn that it was going to be counterproductive.
How was he supposed to be doing that, go about that process of reconciliation? Were we, for instance, because some people have suggested that we adopt the South African model, set up a truth commission, and let everyone come to vent his or her emotions and seek justice for one wrong or the other. What form was it supposed to take?
That reconciliation is not so much. Let me say that we had something like a Puta panel, which was the close approximation to the truth and reconciliation. But there were things that could have been done. For example, during the campaign in 2015, and some of us presented various scenarios on what will happen if this person wins, if this other person wins. One of the consensus was that if Buhari won, we should be very careful that whoever wins should make the other a sort of co-president, because if you lose, if Jonathan loses, there will be it will stoke ethnic sentiments in the Niger Delta, and there will be a risk of resurgence. If Buhari loses, there will be high risk of post-election violence. So shortly after then, during his inauguration, he said he would draw a line. He was going to draw a line going forward. You will be answerable for whatever you do going forward, not back. Not long after, we started hearing on this probe about probe Jonathan, I'll do this, and probe, he's told this. And before you knew it, you are not sensitive to the Nigerian psyche about how it is to stoke ethnic sentiments.
But that proposal, would it have been democratic?
About
making one a co-president, or
not co-president,
I mean,
not co-president in the sense of we are like showing the kind of respect, because one of the reasons African leaders stay tight in office is the fear of what happens without office, fear of being witch hunted. And we are warning, look, this, even if Obasanjo was still able to retrieve a lot of money from the government, Abdul Salam, without making a lot of noise. And you don't need to demonize. So Before you knew it, the Niger Delta Avengers came up. And if the government had not changed course, and now we have oil production at nearly 2.2 million barrels, it was well under 1 million barrels because we were blowing up every place. So it is managing some of these things, the statecraft that is needed. You can still achieve the same, and you can still fight corruption using institutional mechanism. How many times did you hear people in the West, in Britain, saying, we are probing Diziani? But before they go there, before actually a policeman in the UK knocks on your door, he has more than 70% of evidence. But here, first of all, we do this media trial just to be clapped for. This man stole 100 million. This man stole all the money there was nothing in the treasury. That is even before they start to gather the evidence.
But it seems to me that even the fear of being haunted has not prevented our public office holders from committing abominable crimes.
Yes.
At each turn. Because, for instance, if this government leaves power after his term,
we'll hear his own.
We will hear his own stories. Like we have been hearing of the stories of the PDP administration and all of that. None of these seem to have deterred these public office holders from committing these crimes or from becoming more decorous in their conduct in public office.
You know, I've written severally saying that the EFCC, from 2012, I took a position that it has failed, that our system of fighting corruption is not working, and Obasanjo said it not long ago. You know, it's not just a matter of how much money is realized, but you measure these incidents of effectiveness, the impact analysis of fighting corruption. Is it deterring corruption or not? From the time of independence, every government has made fighting corruption a key aspect of its program. Is it working or not? It has to be institution-driven.
Even when it is just lip service.
It's just, I call it gra-gra. You know, this gra-gra.
Grandstanding.
You do all this gra-gra, so you seized 100 trillion and others. It's neither here nor there. If in the end it has not led to a culture of people being less tempted to put their fingers in the cookie jar that belongs to the public, then it's not effective. So the fact is I've not done any impact analysis before and after. Is it working or not?
Isn't this one of the things that may actually be driving this whole agitation for restructuring? There are people who think, for instance, that there's too much power and too much resources located at the center.
Yeah.
And that perhaps if powers and responsibilities and resources are devolved to the federating units, we might have less of these what is happening at the moment, or people pilfering what belongs to the Commonwealth and all of that. But of course, we know that similar things are happening at the state level and even at the local government level.
You're right. The tragedy is that when we talk about restructuring, people only confine all the criticisms of government to the federal government. What happens at the state level is often an impunity. Nobody wants to talk about restructuring if you go to Benue State, for example, why can't the Idoma people start agitating for restructuring so that an Idoma will become governor? So it is part of the national thing. That's what I'm saying, that the point is that it is all about access to federal privileges. Nobody wants to ask the governors critical question. In any case, our democracy is only at the federal level. What we have at the state level are not really, you can't call them democracy. How many state governments lose cases at the state level, in the state high courts? How many, if you conduct local government elections, how many will the state sitting governor lose? It's very little. So it's all about, the only thing that works in this country as much as what is at the federal level. So I think one way of also looking at it is to avoid this term of restructuring, which is an empty buzzword in my own opinion, and look at even devolution and do what John McPherson did in 1951. Which was that when he came around, he found out that the nationalists, there were so much attack on the government center. So he decided now to regionalize national life. And that's why immediately the McPherson Constitution came, you have then regional-based political parties like the Action Group, the MPC, and the strategy was to drive these troublemakers down to the region so that the center could have a breathing space. That was part of the strategy of the McPherson Constitution. So in that sense, devolving power, but that's also making sure that we have some democracy at the state and local government levels, and that we're able to hold our governors accountable. And tell me, if it was Buhari, for example, that went to erect the statue of Zuma in Abuja now, what will happen? The country will go on riot. But the state governor is doing that kind of impunity, and they're signing a Rochas Foundation MOU with Zuma Foundation MOU using state resources. And there's nothing you can do, because the state governors are more like emperors. There's nothing you can do about them. So we're also looking for a change of system that will force the citizens.
And the state assemblies that are supposed to be the check and balance on the executive arm at that level
just
are
rubber
almost
stamps.
non-existent.
They don't exist, because if you don't talk too much, the governor will make sure you don't have a car, which the president cannot do to you here. So let us know that our democracy and democratic structures we have today only operate at the federal level. So part of the challenge of our restructuring is how then do we move some of the gains. Yes, there have been some gains at the federal level where we have some kind of democratic practices and structures and ethos. How do we shift some of them to also be replicated at the state level?
That, of course, then takes us back to this whole question of what role the legislature should play in this whole exercise.
Okay.
Now, if your argument is that the national legislators, as they are now, may be unwilling to lose some of the privileges and some of the powers that they enjoy now, in an attempt at restructuring whatever powers, responsibilities, and privileges that they have, maybe shift some of it to the state and to the local government levels. What is the alternative? What route should we then be taking in going about this restructuring? The option of a sovereign national conference is almost unthinkable at this point in time. Now, the other option is that of following the due constitutional and democratic process and structures that exist now. If these two options seem not workable or viable as they were, what is
I think there was a third option, which was what the Obasanjo and Jonathan tried to do. I don't trust that the national legislature will be able to, recommend changes that will satisfy all the agitators because of the preponderance. Just like during the time of Jonathan conference, people from the North complained about the preponderance of people from the South and Christians. So also, if you look at the legislature, because of the nature of the House of Representatives, which is based on population, you can find that the House of Reps, for example, is dominated by people from the North. If you look at the Senate, because every state has 3, and they have 19 states in the North as against 16 states in the South. So you also see the preponderance. So the people, those agitating from the South, are not likely to believe that they can get legitimate address, the genuine fears will be addressed adequately because the structures are also not in their favor. So an alternative, in my own opinion, will be to take on board the fears of every side, the hopes and the aspirations and the fears. We must address the fears of all groups, North, South, East, and West. And then we come to a table. And then just like Jonathan tried to do by reassuring the legislature that whatever is agreed will pass through the legislature. And I can tell you, if there is a genuine consensus, if there is a genuine consensus then the people in the legislature who are also being teleguided by their representatives do not agree or agree are more likely to key into those recommendations. After all, they've had the doctrine of necessity approved. So it's a matter of, if we do it in such a way, not in such a fiat, telling agitators you go through the National Assembly. It may be the right thing to do, but not the political expedient thing to say.
So your option is that perhaps we go through either the 2005 option that President Obasanjo came with, and then take whatever comes out of that process through the National Assembly. Isn't there going to be another pitfall there? Because the National Assembly, as it is today, remains what it is. There will be the same fears that are now being entertained about the imbalance there.
No. You see, if, for example, every section is taken into, into confidence, every part of the country, and all their fears are taken on board, then it is easier to reach a genuine consensus on. I don't think we are going to have consensus on all those aspects people are talking about. Maybe start from a narrower, maybe a few issue areas. And then once there's a genuine consensus, those people, don't forget the members of National have their constituencies. They have the people who are talking to them from higher above. They have the governors whom help to make them senators and House of Reps. Then they can tell them, look, approve this or do not approve this. They are not acting on their own. They are also being, teleguided, being instructed from somewhere.
Unfortunately, they do not seem to be like where in other democratic climes where the representatives go back to their people every now and then, occasionally, to get the feelings, hold town hall meetings and get the feelings and the views of their people. Here, we have seen legislators who hardly go back to their constituents, who probably go back only when it's time for elections,
sentiments,
and really do not take the interests of their people into consideration in making the decisions.
But if you're a member of the National Assembly, it's an easy task for you. If you're from the Southwest, the South, you say restructuring is an omnibus term. You haven't spelled out what it means. If you're from the North, you may say, yeah, maybe not the right time. They oppose it. That's what the reality is now. So the issue 2005 Obasanjo has issues of legitimacy. People suspected they wanted to use it for a third-term agenda, and there were some suggestions that there were some other agendas he wanted to push. So that tainted that. In the Jonathan own, the idea of the North and Muslims saying that they were deliberately underrepresented also raised legitimacy issues.
All right, well, guess we have to leave it there for now.
Okay,
that is size of our package today. I've been talking with Jideofor Adibe, an associate professor of political science and also a publisher. He joined us on the program, People, Politics, and Power. Do have yourself a wonderful time for the rest of today, and thank you so much for investing your time with us. I am Imoni Amarere. Bye for now.